Welcome everyone to episode 7, season 2 of Hit It Where They Mow, Talking Golf in Texas. My name's Pat Wheeler. Got a special guest today coming in from Waco, Texas, but he's working a lot in Dallas. Mr. Chet Williams, welcome to Hit It Where They Mow.
Thank you, Pat. Good to be here.
Before we get rolling, I want to thank my sponsors. They're the most important folks to me, other than our guest, as far as making this show successful. And I want to start off with the two main sponsors that I have. Niagara Conservation, which is a plumbing company, low-flow toilets that are available to you through Home Depot. And of course, Niagara is very involved with the LPGA Tour and the Volunteers of America tournament coming up in late September at Old American Golf Club in the Colony. It's right next door to the Tribute, which is another course there in the Colony. And I like to say, avoid the water hazards on the course and at home with good toilets. The second one is Veritex Bank, which is the Golf Bank of Texas. And they're a wonderful locally owned bank here in Dallas and all over Texas. And they have some great golfers that are wearing their logo, people like Scotty Scheffler and Sam Bennett and my favorite Cheyenne Knight on the LPGA Tour. So it's the perfect bank for personal accounts and small business accounts. That's Veritex Bank. And don't want to forget my two golf courses near and dear to my heart, the Tempest Golf Club out near Longview off of I-20. East Texas golf as it was meant to be, a grand scale with the pine trees and the hills and the water. And then of course you really ought to look into, we're going to talk golf architecture today, and that is Dornick Hills Country Club in Ardmore, Oklahoma. The actual farm of Perry Maxwell, one of the most revered architects in the history of golf, and we'll touch on him and other great icons, great architects of the past. Chet, I guess we'll get started right there. You've been pretty busy. We're going to talk later a little bit about Whispering Pines near Huntsville, which is the #1 ranked course in Texas, has been for about the last 10 years. Every once in a while, Dallas National might slip in there, and then Whispering Pines dropped to #2. But tell us a little bit about Chet Williams, how you got going in the architecture business, and a little bit about your background in golf.
Okay. Well, I guess if I start in the beginning, I grew up when I was a kid from ages 7 to 14 and lived in Venezuela. And the first golf course I really remember playing was a 9-hole course, and it was in a Exxon Mobil camp down there where all the Exxon and Mobil people lived. And it wasn't much of a golf course, but the one thing I do remember about it is that since it was 9 holes, they would put 2 flags in on every green. And I've always kind of attributed just that kind of a unique kind of a feature to, me realizing there was something kind of different about that golf course. So, because I'd never seen another golf course that had, 2 flags on a green. So I knew there was something different. I think maybe it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to look for things that were different on golf courses and things like that. So I think that's kind of where I got my start. Probably by the time I was 9 years old, we didn't, in Venezuela, weren't able to watch tournaments on TV on the weekends or anything like we do here. So I would start kind of doodling and sketching and things like that, just little pictures. I remember I had an art teacher at one time and actually did a couple of paintings of some golf holes and things like that. So I always had an interest in it. And just, over the years, at some point I got in my life and I said, I thought maybe I could play professional golf at one time, but that really wasn't that realistic. It took me till I got to college to realize that. But when I started thinking, if I'm gonna have to work for a living, what better to do? I mean, there's nothing I would rather do than design golf courses. And so it's kind of worked out for me. Wasn't always the direct path, but I feel that's made a lot of my life easier, with the fact that I can actually, my job is something that I love to do. Most of the time, it's really not like work. It's just fun most of the time.
You know, that's great advice for young people. Pursue what you love, and it's almost like you're not working, and you'll probably do better at it and be successful. I just thought when you were mentioning the 9-hole course on an oil company property, the first round of golf I ever played was in Van, Texas, at the Poco course. The Pure Oil Company had a little 9-hole course there, and it was wonderful. It was a beautiful little piece of property. But on the 8th hole, I thought it was a giant oil tank, but someone said no, it was a water tank. But either way, you had to either play around it, or if you were a long hitter, you could go over it. But that was a unique hazard. You've probably not designed a course with a tank in the middle of the fairway.
No, that's you know, one of the popular words in architecture nowadays is quirkiness.
Yes.
And that would qualify, I think. So.
Let's just pursue that a little bit. You know, like I noticed that Jordan Spieth just played pushing his own cart North Berwick over in Scotland near Edinburgh. And East Lothian is the area they call that, which is beautiful, beautiful area. Muirfield's there, and of course the Renaissance, they call it, rather than Renaissance.
Right.
But you know, the pro there, you've got 3 holes there that have become staples. The Cape hole, which we can talk about, the Barrett's, and the Redan. They're all 3 of them are on that golf course. But it's very quirky. They have the pit where you hit over a wall, and the pro there said that, you know, they probably would design a course like that today, but that's the charm of it. So do you have any hidden wishes to do something like that yourself?
I wouldn't say that I necessarily have any hidden wishes, but I'm not afraid to, you know, try to introduce those kind of things. Normally, if there's something on the property that kind of, you know, leads you in a direction, I'm certainly open to doing that. I probably wouldn't go and actually build a wall just for the purposes of designing a hole around it. I think it would have to be something that would, you know, something that would be there. And I'm sure like the wall on the pit there was probably some old ancient ruin of something, and they probably get told it has to stay.
I was just going to say the cliff hole at Dornick Hills is a great example.
Right.
That edifice is there, or I guess that's what you call it, but there's a big rock there.
Yeah, that's right.
You played up on top of it.
Yeah, it's very unique. You would never forget that.
Right, right.
No, I think it's great to have those kind of features on a golf course if they in fact work and are playable and things like that. I won't give the name on it right now, but I've got a new project down in the Austin area, and there's a hole that kind of has one of those rock faces.
Yeah.
And the membership they hate it because, I won't say all of them do, but the women and the seniors, they can't get the ball up there. So, you know, we're trying to decide what we're going to do on there. So it's got to work.
Gotcha.
And every membership is different and things like that. So you got to, you know, satisfy the clients.
So how long have you been at your craft? You mentioned you've always been enamored with it.
Since I got into the business in 1985.
Okay.
Actually here in Arlington, Texas.
Wow.
So.
Which project was that?
Well, actually, it wasn't a project, but I worked for Jeff Brower, the designer of the Tempest Golf Club.
Great guy, Jeff Brower.
Yeah, I learned a tremendous amount from Jeff. I think Jeff has always kind of taken pleasure. I've always told him that I worked for him for two years, or maybe just under 2 years, but brilliant guy.
Yes.
And when I went to work for Nicholas after working for Jeff, there wasn't a whole lot there that I had to learn. I mean, Jeff taught me pretty much everything I needed to learn. I think he's always kind of liked that fact.
Right.
And I think I actually, taught the guys there a couple of neat little tricks that they weren't aware of that were kind of some of Jeff's stuff.
Yeah. I don't know why my mind just went to this, but did you know the gentleman that was killed with Payne Stewart? You might
Absolutely.
Remind us his name. That was another tragedy.
Yeah, Bruce Borland.
Borland.
He was a very good friend of mine.
Wow.
Great guy, great family man. It was what a tragedy. He was married and he had at least 3 young kids, maybe 4, but at least 3. And it was, just an awful thing.
Yeah, and Payne's agent was such a nice man too. Don't recall his name right off the hand, but he was from like the Birmingham area of Alabama. Interesting that you, like Jeff Brower, knew you wanted to be a golf course architect at an early age. I guess that's just something that you never quite get rid of. He grew up near Medina. Of course, he was very well aware of Championship Golf Course, living in that neighborhood. Walk us through your career. You worked with Jeff in Arlington. What are some of your earlier courses that you worked on? And I want to get into Whispering Pines with you.
Well, the 2 I remember the most when I worked with Jeff, I'm not even sure I can remember their names, but I remember the first one, actually the very first project where I actually got some field experience with Jeff was just the redesign of a par 3 hole out in Las Vegas.
How about that?
I think the course was called Desert Rose, I think. And I was just as green as they come. I'd never done any field work at all. And I think Jeff just sent me out there mainly to get a little experience. And he was relying on the construction crew to kind of handle everything. But, I was going to be out there and going to learn some stuff. And then another couple of projects that I was involved with Jeff was there was a project in Shreveport, Louisiana. If I heard the name of it, I'd remember it, but I can't think of it right now.
Okay.
And then there was another project in the suburbs of Atlanta that he was working on.
Okay.
Again, I can't remember the name of that one either, but
he had an affiliation with Larry Nelson, I think, for a while there. And
he did, for sure.
Probably did some courses in that Atlanta area.
Yeah, I remember Larry coming into the office a couple of times.
Yeah.
Back in those days between 85 and 87.
Now, we're going to talk some more about this later, but I met you for the first time just about a month ago when I got to go to the media day at Corpus Christi Country Club. And I'm so happy to be able to do something for them because of their hospitality and just what a great course it was. And Brent Blackburn and Seth Smith, superintendent, Robert DeLeon, on the Greens committee there. That was quite a great experience. I've written an article about it. I'm looking to try to get it published somewhere, but it's more of a travel article because I'd never been to Corpus Christi. I'm getting up in years, and that's a pretty good sized Texas city there, the biggest city on the Gulf. And so want to get to that a little later, but I want to find out, I guess, what puts you on the map as far as a lot of people knowing who you are is Whispering Pines. And I'm thinking that is approaching 20 years old now. You know the timeline on Whispering Pines?
Yeah, it opened in, it was either 2019 or 2020, so it's 23, 24 years old.
You mean 99 or 20?
1999 or 2000.
I got you. Okay, so it's, yeah. And that was a case of Corby Robertson contacting you or contacting the Nicholas Company, or how did all that transpire?
It's kind of an interesting story. So I was still working for Nicholas at the time, and Mr. Robertson apparently called into the office and was looking for some help in designing his golf course. I don't remember the exact chain of events, but I know there were at least 2 other people from the Nicholas office that went and looked at it before I did. And then I think they ended up getting me involved because I was working for Jack, but I was living in Waco.
Gotcha.
So I was like a 2-hour drive away.
Yeah.
So it kind of made sense for me to do it. So eventually I kind of came in. I remember Corby early on told me that he had given some consideration to getting Jack to design the golf course, but he said ultimately he decided not to because he decided if he wanted to have some input, meaning Corby himself, he wasn't sure that Jack was going to let him do that. And I think that stemmed from the fact that Corby, I don't know if you knew this or not, but he was also the owner, developer of the Austin Country Club with which Pete Dye designed.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he's the one.
But he had his of course, he was an All-American football player at the University of
That's
Texas,
right.
so he's got ties to Austin.
Right. So he's the one that hired Pete to do that, and he's told me some stories about that. But so he decided he was going to work with somebody that worked for Jack, and so it just luckily happened to be myself.
Fantastic.
So it was designed through the Nicholas Company, but Jack had nothing to do with it. He never been there, never seen the plans or anything, as far as I know. And I think even to this day, I think there's only been one or two people from the Nicholas office that have actually been there and seen it or played it.
Now, the story I understand was that Corby had this huge piece of land. I guess Trinity, Texas is probably the closest town to it.
It is, yes.
And he had a pine beetle problem. He had there was an infestation of these pine trees, and so he was going to have to do what they call clear cut. In other words, the only way to get rid of these beetles was to start taking out those trees to stop the spread of it. And at that point, he entertained the idea of putting in a golf course. So if that's correct, say, yeah, that's what I understand, and then kind of walk us through the initial phases of it, how you saw the property, what your initial response to that was.
So I'm not 100% sure about the pine beetles. It may have been that could have happened before I ever got involved.
Sure.
But when I first got there, he had actually started building a golf course. And he'd actually built some holes. They were actually playing on them.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They were, I would call them, they were kind of crude golf holes.
Rudimentary?
Yeah, rudimentary. And I think he had a term, and I think he used to say he called it country golf.
There you go.
Or something like that. It was just something
cow pasture pool.
where they could go have fun or something like that. It wasn't anything very sophisticated or anything like that. So anyway, so we had some stuff started, but we had to kind of work through some things, certainly with him involved. We ended up using some of the same golf corridors that were there. Sometimes we would change them a little bit. Other ones we created some totally new corridors. Sometimes we used part of an old hole. But when we actually got around to it, we reshaped everything. We didn't leave really anything that was there originally other than a corridor that might have been there. In some cases, we had to clear some more trees in some new areas that we went into. But, from the beginning, I knew it was a very special piece of property. And I remember thinking boy, Jack would have really loved to have been involved with this.
Right.
So I felt very fortunate to have the opportunity to do it. But it was very interesting. Like I said, you can go there today and you can still see there's still at least 3, maybe 4 of the original greens that Corby had built for some of his golf holes that are still there that they actually use for practice. And mainly they have a golf camp up there in the summers, Camp Olympia, and they bring the kids out there, and I think they do a lot of practicing on those.
Yeah, they have a great program, a great, what's the word I'm looking for, method of membership. In other words, the members, I think, renew every year, and
I think that's correct.
In the summer, it's closed to the kids in Houston to come up and use it as a summer camp.
That's right.
So his holes are kind of set off from the regular course.
Yeah, you can see them, and they're not really entire holes. They're really just 3 old greens that you can see. And when you play the 11th hole, if you look to behind the green over a little pond, you can see a green there. And I'm sure a lot of people go like, what is that?
Yeah.
And it used to be where he had a hole playing. He actually had a very interesting. It was a par 5, and you had to play over a hill with a blind pond on the other side, and then the green was on the other side. So I kind of had to convince him. I said, no, we don't want to do that. That's a little too quirky.
Right.
And we want to just put the green on the top of the hill and play to the top of the hill and then go off in another direction.
When you saw the property, did it remind you of any other property that you had been on or seen? Because it distinctly did that for me, and I want to just mention it to you.
Yeah, I think, I think for most people, what really distinguishes that property are the lake holes at the end.
Oh, yeah.
You don't see that just everywhere. And that was what I felt was like one of my biggest challenges on the property was to not make that the only thing that people would remember.
Right.
I felt like I needed to make the entire golf course that strong. So that was one of my goals in setting out from the beginning.
It reminded me of Crown Colony, which is near Lufkin. The terrain
Yes.
is very similar to it, and of course that was Devin Bonhaggy, probably their best work or one of their best, and
Certainly considered there, I would
right.
say.
And then of course Whispering Pines is. But that reminds me of something that we had talked a little bit before the show. Is that the ability to remember the holes, and you're right, that closing stretch there is very dramatic, which I think I would have to think you designed it that way, that those particular holes would finish the course, right?
Yeah, well, Corby had he had golf holes there.
Okay.
They're quite a bit different now than what they were, and one interesting story that happened is and that routing, the way it is today, 13 through 18 all play along the edge of Lake Livingston, and all the water's on the left. And very early on, I remember I wasn't really trying to convince him, but I said, you know what, if we, reroute some of these holes and maybe play a couple of them backwards in the other direction, it might be a good idea to, maybe we can get a couple of holes playing with water on the right, kind of loop around, finish them on the left. And I just told him I thought that would be the ideal scenario. But that was one of the few places where he kind of put his foot down. He goes, no, I think it ought to be this way.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember those holes. I know there's a relatively short par 5 that runs along there, and there's a par 3 that's pretty long, like 180 to 200 yards. And then the 18th hole is a monster. I mean, that is a big hole.
Yeah, he can play 500 yards from the tips, but I'll never experience that.
Right. I do remember this, not to toot my own horn because I'm not a very good player anymore, but I remember hitting every green in regulation, every par 3 in regulation, the media day that I played there. And they were all anywhere from a hybrid to a 9-iron, depending on where the tee was set up. I think the one hybrid was that hole. Is that 16?
16.
Yeah.
15's a little short par 3.
Oh yeah, that is a very cool hole. Almost an island.
Almost an island.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, so that kind of puts you on the map. And again, for 20 years now, it's been ranked as number 1 or number 2 in the state year in, year out. And I guess that opens some doors for you too, right?
I would certainly say so. I mean, I've had some people that have called me up over the years, and I would say that, they say, hey, yeah, we've seen Whispering Pines, and we've seen some other stuff you've done that you did with Nicholas, and yeah, for sure, without a doubt, it's gotten me some attention.
Right. Let's move on to Corpus Christi now. That was an interesting time for me because you came out and I had never played it before, so I wasn't aware of some of the changes you were describing. But I'll just go ahead and tell you in my article, I describe you as how did I describe you? As rather pragmatic and rather straightforward. I don't see you trying to wow anybody. I think really, to me, it's kind of understated. Is that fair, or is that?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Although it depends on the property. Right. Depends on budgets and things like that too. Right. Corpus Christi project was certainly more on the modest side as far as budget goes. It's also a very modest site. It's a dead flat piece of property. There's really no slope to it at all. And the things that really stand out about it the most now, which I'm sure it wasn't when it was done, are some of the trees that were planted that have kind of grown up and kind of line the golf holes. But the interesting thing about that golf course, I remember when I first went down there, all they were interested in doing was redoing their bunkers, because their bunkers were not draining, they would flood, the sand was terrible, the playability was terrible. And I remember going down, and before I met with their committee, and I went out and kind of toured the golf course, and I went through the front nine. And after the front nine, I kind of paused for a little bit. I think I went up to the clubhouse and got a iced tea or something. And I said, there's something about that nine that I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I said, but there's something. So I started thinking about it a little bit before I went around. And the more I thought about it, I said, what it is there are 6 greens on the front nine that are the exact same green, almost the exact same green. There was low in the front, elevation change high in the back, and then a bunker on the front left and a bunker on the front right. And I said, this is just, it's repetition. It wasn't like they were exact, but it's something that I picked up on. And then as I went through the back nine, there were about, 3 or 4 more. And so I said, to me, I said, what this golf course needs the most, more than just having their bunkers redone, is it needs to have some variety to it. Not just the same thing over and over. To me, that's the worst kind of golf course for me to play, is just, bunker front left, bunker front right, narrow entrance that you try to, if you can't fly it in, you're trying to constantly fit it in or run it in this narrow area. So I finished my tour and went back and met with the committee, and I kind of mentioned that to them, and they were kind of looked at me with a puzzled look, kind of going like, what do you mean? Really? And I said, yeah. So I had to kind of walk them through and explain it to them that, number 2 is like this, and number 4 is like that, and number 5, and they go like, wow, you're right. And I think, over a little bit of time, they decided if we're gonna have to close some things down out here for a little while anyway, maybe we need to address these other kinds of issues. So that's what we ended up doing. We ended up redesigning all the greens complexes, not just the putting surfaces, but the surrounds, the bunkers, and all that. So I think now it's got I think that all 18 green complexes, they work as a unit, but yet every one of them is different. And to me, that's always one of my biggest goals on any course that I design, is variety, and always striving to do that. To me, that's what makes a golf course interesting and fun.
Well, as you were talking about that, I was remembering that par 5 green, I believe it is, that's very long, and the pin was up in the corner there, and I think it was a par 5. And so you said you reduced the green sizes and the bunkering dramatically, but there is that variety. And I will say this about it. It's it's a flat piece of property, but there are giant palms. There's water on it. Your bunkering is superb. I mean, they're in places where they frame the hole, and you've got to avoid it. And I don't want to give away my article, but Ham Rogers was talking about he hates that bunker on number 9, and you were just kind of smiling, because that comes with the territory, I guess, when you're an architect.
Sure.
It's very strategic. But the giant palms, there's a certain ambiance there. And also, I think one of the things about that course that was so hard for me playing it only one time was there's so many dog legs. And you got to be, I think I was just beating on a driver out there, and I was getting in all kinds of trouble,
Yeah.
Not that I wouldn't hit a driver, but I would think a little more about how I wanted to shape it maybe. But
yeah.
So that's
I don't. I'm not a fan of straight golf holes at all. I'll do just about anything to make it move a little bit one way or the other. I can remember a saying that Jack used to say on occasion. He would say, "The good Lord never did anything in a straight line, or never did anything straight." That's always kind of remained with me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to have a huge bend. I think the number 10 at Corpus Christi, I think we moved the tees about, I don't know, maybe 25 yards to the right from where they were, just to give it a little bit of bend. But they had several holes out there that were literally dead straight.
Wow. Sometimes the straight holes are the hardest driving holes. Though.
Can be.
I'm thinking like who knows what Gil's going to do with it, but number 7 at Colonial, dead straight. I can't ever hit that fairway, but it's the same for a lot of guys. I notice in tournament, a lot of them are missing it left and so forth.
Yep.
I was. I wanted to ask you this too. There's a couple of things you said that I really wanted to follow up on. One of the things I wrote down here is deception. You're talking about the sameness of those holes, and yet that course. Now I don't know if it had been redone before or whatever, but that was a Robert Trent Jones course, and Robert Trent Jones was the preeminent architect during the 60s.
No doubt.
And a guy named Dick Wilson was maybe a second place guy, and Dick was very good with Doral and the course that Trip Davis grew up on that I played for many years in Atlanta. Mystery Valley was an old Dick Wilson course. Fabulous strategic golf. But what about deceiving somebody on a hole? Is that part of the process?
I think so, yes. But again, I will typically, I won't say I've never done it, but it would be pretty rare for me on a course like Corpus Christi, for example, to go out and say, build a big mound or a big landform to make something blind.
Okay, I got you.
Now, having said that, the third hole at Corpus Christi, if you don't drive the ball in the right place or you drive it in the right side, you got a blind shot into the green. But it was because there was a big mound that Robert Trent Jones had built back in the 60s. It was there, and I just decided to leave it there and kind of tuck the green over behind it. Whereas if you drive the ball down the left side of the fairway, you can see a lot more of the green. Mm-hmm. So that was an opportunity again to do something kind of different, a little bit of variety. There's nothing over the top of the mound, no hidden bunkers or anything, just the green. Mm-hmm. So you
trying
play
to remember that hole, I'm struggling a little bit.
It's a pretty strong hole. It's one where we actually moved the green back. We probably gained 35, 40 yards on that hole. I'd say it's probably one of the stronger holes on the golf course.
Yeah. That reminds me of you build what the members want, right? Is that pretty much how you do it? In other words, do you want a nice country club course that the seniors and women can enjoy, or do you want a championship course? Or your thoughts on that?
Usually, I would say that ultimately, your clients, they're the ones that are paying the bill,
right?
But for most people, most clubs, there's going to be players of every category that are going to be there. Mm-hmm. So you have to try to design something that's kind of, challenging for the really good players. If it's too easy for them, they're going to probably go find somewhere else to play.
Okay.
But you can't beat up the average guy, because it's the average guy. It's the more of them that are paying the bill than the 2% that are really good players.
Right.
So you got to take all of that into account.
Okay.
And if ultimately, it's up to the people, the members that are playing it, if you've done a good job or not. Mm-hmm. I may think I have, but if they don't agree with me and they don't like it, then I've kind of failed at what I'm trying to do.
What surprised me, and I want our listeners to know about this, is that I said, why reduce the bunkering that dramatically? And you mentioned the expense involved. That was really something new to me. And of course, the guys that are on the greens committees at these different courses, they know that. But
they, at Corpus Christi, for example, they had a definite budget in mind almost from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so we were trying to give them the most bang for the buck for that budget. So, and it's kind of interesting. You did say that the greens were smaller, which in fact they were. They're the smallest greens I've ever done on any golf course. But their greens had shrunk so much, their original greens, that even my greens being small are still significantly bigger than what they had. So
because of the way they mow them, right? They just end up encroaching on them, kind of.
Pretty much, yeah. It's going to be some different factors, but yeah, you've got to be mindful of that edge all the time and maintaining it. Otherwise, they do kind of creep in. Fairways will do the same thing. You know, the guy on the mower, he doesn't want to get his mower out into the rough and scalp it, because it'll scalp it down and make it, you know, look brown, and he gets in trouble with the boss. So he always kind of hedges a little bit in, and that just gradually both sides of the rough start coming in. So fairways typically will get narrower over time, as will greens. The bunkers themselves were more a factor of the budget than anything.
But in general terms, you're saying that the bunkering is the most expensive thing on the golf course now, as opposed to the greens.
It's certainly one. Bunkers cost a lot more on a square foot budget price than greens do. You know, greens may be, you know, depends where you are and things like that, availability of materials, but they may be $6 or $7 a square foot. Bunkers might be with the liners and the sand, you know, depending on what kind of liner you put in, the quality of the sand. I mean, they could be $11 or $12 a square foot. So.
Yeah, and that's to help them drain better and be more playable, you know, after rains and that kind of thing. And,
that's right.
Yeah, and I wanted to get onto your. And I would love to go back to Corpus Christi and play that golf course. I want to thank them again for having me down, and it was great because I got to meet you, and now we're talking architecture, and I wanted to see as far as creativity and history and that kind of thing. You know, Jeff knows all about you know, the Perry Maxwells and the Harry Colt and Alistair McKenzie and Charles Allison and who am I forgetting? Some of the other great architects through the years. Do you draw from them in any way that as you look at a piece of property? You know, we mentioned those holes at North Berwick that are you know, the Barrett's and the Redan and the Cape Hole and that kind of thing. I think you've got a Cape Hole or two at Whispering Pines.
Yeah, number 14 for sure is.
Yeah, because
without a doubt. As a matter of fact, that's probably one of my favorite holes I've ever designed. And it was just kind of there. I mean, it wasn't
and for everybody, that means there's a body of water, and how much do you want to bite off?
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, in the case of 14 at Whispering Pines, it's a very short hole, so there's, if you're a long hitter, they can potentially drive the green. Yeah,
it is cool.
And I just really like that hole for a lot of reasons. It's got a really interesting green as well.
So is that a factor, your study of different people and their works and that kind of thing, or is that just something you enjoy doing? And
I would say indirectly.
Indirectly, okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it'd be kind of foolish for me to say that it had nothing to do with what I do.
Right.
I mean, but you know, I know one of my favorite golf courses is San Francisco Golf Club.
Tillinghast.
Yes, and I would say of the golden age architects.
Tillinghast is huge. Yeah,
he was probably one of my favorites. But I don't think I've ever gone on a golf course or something I'm designing and say that, oh yeah, I'm going to do kind of like what Tillinghast did on this hole. But for sure, you know, I go and I see things, and I think things register in my mind. You know, just the look of a certain thing or something, and I think those things will come back up in my mind. So I think undoubtedly some of those things must sneak in there sometimes.
We're talking with Chet Williams here on Hit It Where They Mow, talking golf in Texas, and Chet is one of the top architects in the business today. He's based out of Waco, Texas. He's done the Whispering Pines, which is considered the top course in Texas. He's done other golf courses. He just recently was in doing a renovation at Corpus Christi Country Club, is where I met him. And just another little break to remind you that I want to thank my sponsors, Veritex Bank, Niagara Conservation, which is a plumbing company, and also Dornick Hills in Ardmore, Oklahoma, Perry Maxwell's home course, and the Tempest near Longview. You can go to their websites, Google Dornick Hills or Tempest, and make your arrangements. You can visit Dornick Hills by contacting the pro shop, having your pro contact them, and of course you can go online and make reservations at the Tempest. And I would be fair to say probably if your pro shop would contact Corpus Christi Country Club, Brent Blackburn would probably be able to help you get on and play that golf course.
Yeah, that's probably right.
One of the things, I just want to throw this out there. It's in my new book, The Fringe Runner, which you can get on Amazon.com. And I've written about Prairie Dunes, which is one of my favorite courses, inland courses. It's my favorite inland course in Hutchinson, Kansas, a Perry Maxwell and Press Maxwell combination there. Press was his son and finished the additional 9 holes, and perhaps was the real genius because he blended them in to where you can't tell what's Perry and what's Press. But I remember one time I ran into Brandel Chamblee, and Brandel, of course, is from Irving and very, very knowledgeable. And I mentioned watching him at the old Briarwood Country Club in Tyler.
Yep.
And it was kind of a handmade course. I think the original 9 was done by John Henry out of Waxahachie. I think Corsicana. And then I'm not sure who did the second 9 there, but Brandel made this comment, "Oh yeah, I remember it was a great little course with the pushed up greens. And I thought, well, is he kind of like denigrating the course, pushed up greens? And I always thought that bothered me. Like, I didn't know anything about pushed up greens, but I know they were little and they tended to all break toward the front of the green. And then I got the opportunity to play Cherry Hills, which where they're having the U.S. Amateur this year, one of the great courses of America where they've hosted U.S. Opens and PGAs. And Clayton Cole was my host, wonderful man, formerly the pro of Dallas Country Club, now retired pro there. And he said, "Pat, 14 of these greens here are the original pushed up greens." Mm-hmm. Then he explained to me a pushed up green will drain off the front and has a longevity to it that a USGA quote design green, you have to redo it about every 20 or 25 years for drainage reasons. Your comments on those comments?
Well, I think when I think of what I call a push-up green, I think people maybe get them confused. I think there's 2 different ways you could look at them. Somebody would say, or some architects like myself, if they went down to Corpus Christi, they may call those greens push-up greens.
Because they're all elevated.
Because they're elevated, because everything there is so flat.
That's right.
You have to build them up.
Gotcha.
So in general, once you do that, to tie back into existing ground, you either have to drop off into a bunker, or you have to slope off into natural grade. Now, another time people use the term push-up green can be more of a method of construction. It doesn't necessarily have to be that it's raised up, although most of them are. But some people refer to a push-up green, just like you say. It's not necessarily a USGA construction. It may be existing native soils that were there that they literally pushed up and had to raise up for the same reason we talked in Corpus Christi. And then sometimes, if they've got really good, they may just be topsoil greens instead of sand like you have in a USGA construction. Sometimes, depending on the quality of the native soil, they might mix some sand in with it. And so sometimes push-up can mean just being raised up. Sometimes it can mean built out of native soils as opposed to, kind of the laboratory of the USGA construction. But I think both of them, I think what I've noticed over the years is the more you are up in the north part of the country, from the midpoint up, you see a lot more push-up greens there than you do down in the south. And I think that's mainly because the soils are much more conducive to that up there than they are down here. Down here, a lot of times we just have clay.
Gotcha.
And you're not going to build a green that's going to perform well or play well or last at all if that's what you have.
Interesting. I wanted to mention something going back to what we were talking about earlier about holes you've seen, how it affects you, and that kind of thing. One of my favorite shows of all time, when I had a radio show for about 10 years, was having Tom Weisskopf on. And of course, him and Jay Morrish, and then individually, each of them did some great work, as you know. But he said he wanted to have every course he designed, he wanted to have a drivable par 4.
Right.
And he said he got that from St. Andrews. He said there's 4 different holes there, depending on the wind, that are drivable on different days. And
right.
I thought, wow, that's, he took the oldest and the best. Anything like that? Any kind of philosophical thing you have like that? Like Tom said, I want to have a course with at least one drivable par 4. Anything like that for you?
I don't think there is really.
Okay.
I'm such a. It may sound kind of odd, but I'm really looking at a piece of property, and I'm kind of looking at that land to kind of like show me where the golf holes want to be. I'm not going in there with a preconceived idea that says I've got this hole and I'm going to put it here no matter what, or I'm going to try to, I don't have anything designed going in that said I'm going to take this hole and I'm going to find a place to put it. I'm looking to try to find where, I can get the 18 best holes that will fit the ground the most naturally as possible. To me, that's a big difference in why you look at some golf courses and they can be 2 years old, but if they're routed right and they fit the land right, they could look like they've been there forever.
That's cool.
And I would say that's generally what I try to do. That's a big part of what I try to do. And like I said, I try to let the land try to show me.
I love it. I love this.
Where things want to be.
This is for my friend Bill Vogany, who's my host at Prairie Dunes. Very Maxwellian.
Yeah.
Because Maxwell, I love it at Dornick Hills, he's got on the plaque there, some of these holes have been here since Genesis, which is a biblical reference, like they've always been here. Yeah. I just discovered them. And I know McKenzie said that of Maxwell. He said he may never get the credit he deserves because it doesn't look like he really did anything. Right. Like it was already here.
Yeah. Well, that's the one thing I'm the most happy about on my newest golf course in Columbus, Texas. It's called the Covey.
I heard it's fantastic.
And it was a wonderful piece of property, and it had all these just amazing natural features, and I think I was literally able to incorporate every one of them into the golf course in some way or the other. And I would think that only because, I think it's a golf course that's comparable to Whispering Pines. Wow. The property itself is better than Whispering Pines. It's got 90 feet of elevation change, whereas Whispering Pines might have 30, something like that. So it's got triple the topography.
Would you call Columbus hill country or just on the edge of it, kind of?
I would say it's on the edge.
So it's kind of piney, a little bit of like Bastrop, a little piney woods there maybe?
It does have 2 or 3 big clumps of pine trees in the property.
Interesting.
And a bunch of oaks. But if you didn't know how flat everything was as you're driving into Columbus from Houston, you wouldn't call it hill country. But if you just got plopped into the golf course and you saw it, you'd go like, oh yeah, this is hill country.
It's about halfway between Austin and Houston, right?
It is.
Somewhere in that.
Very close.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time here. This is the quickest hour ever. And I've got a new thing for my listeners, savor, subscribe, and share. And when I talk about savoring, it means you can listen to 10 or 15 minutes, come back and listen to another 10 or 15 minutes. But you've got some work going on here in Dallas and some future work. I wanted you just to mention kind of what's going on with you now and what you got coming up.
Yeah, so I'm going to be finishing up here in by the end of August, early September, 2 projects here in the Dallas area. Doing some work at Dallas Athletic Club on the goal course. The main focus of that is kind of redesigning 6 holes.
Okay.
Pretty much completely.
Wow.
And then on the entire golf course, we're putting in a new irrigation system, all new cart paths, building a few new tees and some things like that. But the main focus is going to be on those 6 golf holes, which will be
great club, DAC.
Yeah, it is. Really
Great
is.
club, yeah.
So it's holes 16, 17, 18, and then 5, 6, and 7. So primarily taking, 5, 6, and 7 were probably the least interesting parts of that golf course. So we're kind of trying to make that a little bit more fit in with the rest of the golf course. And then 16, 17, 18, it's kind of a long story, but basically the membership is just not happy with the 18th hole and hasn't been ever since the first time I've been there, probably 20 years ago. And they finally asked me, I said, well, what would you do to make it better? So I told them, and it actually involved having to change 16 and 17 also. They got on board, so we're doing it.
This is the gold.
Gold.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is no pushover.
No.
I played the blue when I finally got where they had the PGA and so forth. When I played the gold, I thought, this is no JV course. This is a pretty good golf course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
actually quite a bit longer than the blue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think this is part of what we're trying to do on the gold is to kind of get it to where people will look at it in the same way they look at the blue.
Good for you. Good for you.
And then at Royal Oaks,
which is near and dear to my heart. I love Royal Oaks.
So Royal Oaks is primarily they're regrassing the entire golf course.
Wow.
And we're regrassing all the greens as well, and doing a little bit of minor tweaking, I would call it, in the greens. I think most members won't even notice it, but there'll be some little minor changes. The biggest thing we're doing there is we're shortening the 16th hole, which is a par 3, which played about 200 yards. We're shortening it to about 140 yards. And the reason we're doing that is the club, maybe next year, they want to greatly expand their short game facility. And so by doing that, we're going to create a lot of extra space for them to do that. So that'll be a next year project. But this new 16th hole is going to be really cool. It's only 140 yards from the back, but it's going to be it's going to have some of that quirk.
Well, I was going to say it must be devilish. It must be.
It really is. It's kind of. Some people would call this kind of a hole, or refer to it as like a volcano hole.
Oh, wow, okay.
And what that usually means, usually the green is perched up real high and it kind of drops off to the sides. And the green's going to have a little bit of a feel that it's got a little bit of a crown to it.
Okay.
So the edges are going to be kind of sloping off. It's going to be real fun, I think.
Cool.
I've had a couple people tell me already that they think it's going to be their favorite hole on the course, so that'll be nice.
That will be nice. And what about something out in my neck of the woods? I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I can briefly. Yeah. I do have another brand new course I'm going to be working on in the Tyler area. I think it's actually in Lindale.
Not too far from Van I talked about earlier.
That's right. Yeah. I think there's another golf course. The property is right near Interstate 20.
Right.
And there's another golf course right across the highway, but I can't remember the name of it.
Garden Valley.
Garden Valley. Yeah. So if anybody knows where that is, it's kind of a reference point, but a fantastic piece of property.
Right.
Fantastic. Certainly equal to the site in Columbus that I was talking about.
Wow.
And this one's got a tremendous amount of pine trees and, like 3 separate creeks that run through the property and a big lake down in the low end where all the creeks run into. Fabulous trees. It's going to be really special. By
the way, I was thinking about a landmark close by in terms of the name and so forth. And I've become infatuated with the Natchez River, but I don't know how close it is to your property, but it's in that vicinity. I even noticed they're having a river race on the Natchez, which I didn't think had enough flowing to it to do that.
Right.
But it's more down by Palestine in that area, south of there. But anyway, what have I forgotten to ask you, Chet? I mean, you're a Baylor Bear, I know that.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I guess Waco, that's about as central as you can get located for Texas, but you're not limited to Texas. You probably do works elsewhere.
Yeah, I've been, lately, seems like the last few years, everything's been in Texas. But I'm not afraid to go anywhere. I mean, I've worked in Asia and South Korea, and Japan and Thailand and Canada. I've got a project actually in Medellin, Colombia.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm not sure, I'm not holding my breath on when that one's going to start.
Got you.
I think they're having some internal Colombia issues right now.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping one day, because it'll be a really nice project. I've actually done 2 other golf courses in Colombia. So I think before we started this today, I mentioned to you that I grew up in Venezuela.
That's right.
And so kind of going back to Colombia, it's kind of like going back home to me.
You habla Espanol?
Si, senor.
That's got to be. Yeah, I want you to take me along on one of these trips. I would love to do that. You've been a wonderful guest. I think about my younger brother Tim, and I think about my days in high school doodling golf holes. And I'm talking to a guy who actually gets to build them, and that must be just very, very satisfying. And I love that philosophy. I think it was Maxwell that said about Prairie Dunes, there's 100 good golf holes here. I've got to extract 18.
Yep.
And it sounds like you've got some property like that. I really do. It's called the Covey, your new one down in Columbus.
Yeah.
I do want to go see that soon.
Yeah,
that sounds wonderful.
Happy to show you that one. I'm very, very proud of that one, for sure.
Right. Well, I want to thank you again for being on. I want to wish you continued success, and I look forward to seeing the Covey and then maybe the Gold Course in Royal Oaks when you're done there. And my heart is going to be really in that one down around Van and Tyler, because that's my stomping ground. So thank you again for being on today.
Okay, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You bet.